Hi, welcome to America's Crossroads. I'm Lou Green, and I'm here with Fred Starr from New Orleans. Welcome to the show, Fred.
Thank you.
Fred is the owner of the Lombard Plantation in New Orleans, and he'll tell you all about that, but the link to the Lombard Plantation and what happened after Katrina, and some amazing things took place down there.
This is a house that was built in the beginning of the 19th century by a Frenchman for his rather spoiled kid. The old man had a good deal of money, and the son had no visible vocation, and so he apprenticed him, by the way, to an artist who was giving lessons locally named Audubon. But it was built in the early 19th century in a pure West Indian style. It was a farming operation, a working plantation, then on the edge of the city of New Orleans. Now it's completely absorbed by the city. And I bought it 25, 30 years ago. It was completely forgotten. And the book, which is the plantation house was sold, the whole property was sold in 1833. And in the advertisement, they described it as the house as une belle maison in French. And that's the title of the book. And it's the story of the entire neighborhood, Bywater, of which this house is a kind of anchor. And this is downriver, a mile from the French Quarter. So it's within the city. Bywater was a completely forgotten and pleasantly backward place until Katrina. Since Katrina, it's become one of the hottest real estate markets in the country.
It didn't flood.
It didn't flood. You got it. And it's become a center of hipster culture there. But this house has seen everything come and go, and I assume it will outlive the current fashion.
Well, you have a book about the house, and the house has a lot of stories to tell.
It does indeed.
And it's
yeah.
quite an interesting place.
Well, it is a pure West Indian dwelling, and remarkably preserved. They were too poor to screw it up, basically. I mean, it takes money. If you have a little cash, you say, why don't we move this wall or change that door or so on. They never had that kind of cash. From the Civil War on especially, and therefore it was remarkably preserved, run down, but entirely there. The other curious thing about it is that it has lived through every phase of the city's life. For example, in the 19th century, just a couple of blocks away, Latrobe, the architect of the U.S. Capitol, lived and died, as did his son, just very close by. Later in the 19th century, the famous boxing match with John L. Sullivan and Gentleman Jim Corbett. This was the first great heavyweight fight. Took place, a few steps down the road from this house. And then in the early 20th century, if you'd been there in the 1950s, you might have seen a woman walking her a stroller or a baby carriage with a little boy in it. She had occupied 3 or 4 rented apartments within a block of this house. That was the man who later assassinated John F. Kennedy. Can you imagine? This is where he began his career. And a few years later, down to the present, in fact, if you go to the wonderful, best surviving neighborhood restaurant just a couple of blocks away, Jack Dempsey's. It's the only place I've ever seen Fats Domino in public, and he's often there. So this is a house and a neighborhood which tells a pretty rich story. The house itself is truly remarkable in that the attic, the upper story, is held up by huge cypress beams, beautifully hand-hewn beams that were assembled on the ground, or rather hewn on the ground, and you can see the Roman numerals. And then they were hauled up and assembled up on the top. And it has a very complex system of trussing. In fact, it's called Norman trussing, dates back to the 16th century. It's the best Norman trussing in the Americas, all sitting under the roof of this, and it was quite forgotten 30 years ago.
Well, that number one, the trussing and all that, that's why it's still there.
That's right, that's right. Instead of having the roof blown off.
Yeah, it's not going to go away, and all. But now
it's built of 3 courses of local bricks.
Mm-hmm.
The walls are that thick, and you don't blow them. And no hurricane blows them.
Well, you wrote a book on the architecture of the Garden District.
Yeah.
And you know quite a bit about
Southern Comfort.
All that, yeah. And that's a very interesting book. And
well, this is about the house, about the people who lived in it, how they lived, and that's very interesting because, of course, they didn't have AC, and you figure it's hot as Hades in the summer, 95 degrees, 95% humidity. So they have, you see across the front, 4 huge doors, double doors that you open up in the summer, open the back door, and you get a fresh breeze going through. It wasn't air conditioned until 6 years ago.
Well, the river helps out too.
The river helps too, but that meant that you were, people were virtually living outdoors. The previous owners wanted to get out of Dodge really fast, and I don't know why. I've never been able to trace them further. They disappeared into the depths of California, whence they came originally. They were lawyers, and they were eager to sell fast, and I was able to respond. I knew the house. I said, I'll go for it. Well, then I did nothing about it until basically 10, 12 years ago, when began the really intensive process of restoring. We decided to not just to, gussy it up, but to put it back into the exact condition it was originally. So, for example, we didn't have the hooks that held up the gutters, hand-forged iron big hooks. So we didn't know how big were the gutters. Were they this big, this big? So we dug along the side, and we found eventually one of the hooks that had fallen down, sent it off to the blacksmith, and had new identical gutter hooks created.
Well, it's a big project.
Big project, and then finally, I didn't own when I bought the house, I didn't own the front yard or the backyard. In fact, there was a chain link fence, both, because this was a big heroin area of town. And then decided, well, wait, isn't this where the kitchen house stood? It had disappeared, apparently burnt down in the 1890s. So, having spent the first part of my career doing archaeological work, we excavated it. And we found the footings of the original kitchen house. Well, we had the footings, we had the original plan, we had a painting of the dependencies, the outbuildings, and so we rebuilt the kitchen house. There's no guesswork at all.
Is the cistern still there?
The cisterns were above ground, of course. They collected water off the roof. Why? Because you're not going to drink the river water, which is what you get from a well. And so every house in New Orleans had a cistern connected with it. And they look like, how to describe it. Mark Twain visited New Orleans.
It's like a miniature version of a water tower.
Water tower on a
towers?
train, yeah.
That's
right. And he visited New Orleans, saw these cisterns everywhere, and said it looks like it gives these houses the appearance of being breweries. Which is
well.
Now we know exactly where the cistern was. We know exactly its size. We know from existing photographs of other cisterns that made in exactly the same time within a mile of this place. So we are, in fact, rebuilding the cistern this summer.
Great. When are you going to open the brewery?
Right. Good idea.
Well, that's great, Fred. And your book is out.
The book is out, published by University of Mississippi Press. Mm-hmm. They did a beautiful job.
And the name of the book is?
Une belle maison.
And we'll put a picture of that book up on the screen.
Idea. It's actually a fascinating story because it's a history of New Orleans in a way, certainly of this neighborhood, and of post-Katrina New Orleans, and then the amazing story of the survival of a truly wonderful house that was utterly forgotten.
Well, New Orleans is a very historic place, and if people go to New Orleans, they should find somebody like Fred to walk around with and get some real history. And because it's loaded, the place is loaded.
Yes, and so are a lot of the visitors.
Yes. Well, they'll tell you anything you want. Anyway, thank you, Fred.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for being on America's Crossroads.
Thank you.
Fred Starr.